Hello and welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. My guest today is Tim Crew, CEO of Lannett Company, a generics manufacturer and contract development and manufacturing organization. This podcast is brought to you by Lannett Company in partnership with pharmaphorum. And stay tuned at the end of the conversation for a second bonus conversation with Tom Lewis, VP of Supply Chain and CDMO Management at Lannett. I'm going to be talking to Tom a little bit about what a CDMO is and why someone might want to use one, and some of the trends right now in pharma manufacturing. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Good morning, and thank you.
We're going to talk a little bit about what Lannett does, and then we're going to talk about a very hot topic, important topic in the pharma world today, which is insulin. So stay tuned for that conversation. But before we jump into it, Tim, tell me a little bit about yourself, about Lannett, and what you guys focus on and work on.
Well, sure. Again, good morning, and thank you, everyone, for listening in, and appreciate you having me on the show, the podcast. My name's Tim. I'm a CEO of Lannett. I've been here about 5 years. I've spent a better part of 30 years in industry with both multinational, domestic, international firms. Brief stint in the military before that, but I've been in pharmaceutical healthcare space for virtually all my life. We here at Lannett are one of the last Mohicans standing, if I may say, relative to generic manufacturing in the U.S. We are a U.S.-based firm. Our team's all here. The company's been around for over 70 years, founded in 1947. So we've been at this business as an organization for a very, very long time, and proud to be delivering high-quality, reliable medicines to our customers and their patients for all that time.
So you said there's not too many CDMOs left or companies like you. Why is that? What's the sort of background there, and why are these organizations important to the pharma industry?
Well, as it relates to the generic component, CDMO has some other moving parts around it. But as it relates to medicines in the United States, people are often somewhat surprised to understand that the vast majority of drugs these days are actually produced overseas. And they're produced overseas by companies many people haven't heard of, generic manufacturers at this point, because of the affordability of generic medicines. Represent close to 90% of what patients consume today, right? 90% of the medicines. Brand companies are more well-known. They have wonderful medicines. We need companies to eventually have a generic, but they serve much, much smaller patient populations at this point in time. Very specialized needs tend to be quite a bit more expensive. And so over the years, as generic manufacturers have competed for business for their customers and for their patients, price points have become very affordable. It's a little harder on the manufacturing side, but it's good on the public health side. The generic medications have come down in cost dramatically. As I said, 90% of those medicines now are, generic. That people consume on a daily basis are largely generic medications. And the API, what's called the active pharmaceutical ingredient, the stuff that does the medicine work, has long since moved to overseas manufacturing, largely India and China. And now today, the finished dose as well is largely coming out of India. So being a U.S. manufacturer, we're proud. We have some advantages relative to speed and access and our sort of cultural commitments to what we're trying to do. But economically, it's challenging. So we're proud of the fact that we've continued to make a market by providing high-quality, reliable medicines, and there's still a willingness to buy those, but you have to be competitive. So again, one of the things that we think that Lannett offers is a sort of a U.S.-based manufacturer with a wonderful quality control record, a wonderful supply record, is that in areas where that supply and reliability is absolutely essential to the delivery of your business, to where you want to reduce the concerns about potential compliance issues that you do see often throughout the industry, where you want to be able to work with a partner that is U.S.-based in a central time zone with all English-speaking sort of employees, that just makes communication easier than some of the suppliers out there, some of the CDMOs might have. We think we're a wonderful choice. We've been doing CDMO work with other partners for a very long time. And I would suggest if you're looking for a CDMO partner, we, as a U.S.-based manufacturer, continue to find ways to lower our costs on the core generic business that we own. But since so much of that business as an industry has moved overseas, we are looking to position our capacities, our capabilities dedicated to people who are willing and see an appropriate return in their investment to work with us for all the strengths that we do have that I just recently tried to articulate. The local access, strong communication, great culture, great history, supply reliability, and supply quality. And it's important to us, right? As we continue to evolve in the industry, as we continue to focus on bringing affordable insulin to the market, as we continue to sell our generic products, we have the space, the energy, the commitment, and the strong desire to leverage these incredible strengths of our plant in Seymour, and the team that is in Seymour, and the culture that is in Seymour, to help our partners bring their important medicines to the United States and beyond.
Interesting. And those overseas moves are is there kind of a quality control issue there? I think I just read a report the other day about a leukemia drug that was coming out of companies in India that were poor quality drugs, so what's the advantage? What are some of the advantages to keeping that manufacturing here in the U.S.?
Well, I want to be careful about not painting things with too broad of a brush. We have an FDA out there today which approves medicines and is part of the process on checking to make sure that generics are of quality and reliability that are meeting government standards. There are very strict rules around what needs to be done to make a generic medicine, and the FDA generally, before they approve a product and ongoing inspections, requires those products to be what's called equivalent, that has the same sort of biopharmaceutical effect. Indeed, as products have moved overseas, and some of the timing it takes for the FDA to get caught up in inspections, especially after the recent COVID pandemic that we all managed through, there are often findings that the FDA has to manage, and if it's severe enough, they will curtail the importation of those medicines. But for sure, one of the things that we try to differentiate ourselves about at Lannett is the sort of reliability and quality of our supply chain. And while there may be a supplier overseas that stumbles, or many other overseas suppliers that can step in, right? But that does require a change to the medication, what it looks like, the conversations a patient might have with a pharmacist. When you go to Lannett, we think that happens a whole lot less. You buy from Lannett, you can continue to buy from Lannett, and you have less worry, we believe, based on our compliance histories, that something might happen. Now, again, that's a forward-looking statement, and the FDA is the one who makes those determinations. But in our 70 years of operations, we've never had a warning letter, right? We've had, observations as any organization would do, but our compliance record, our quality record is really stellar. And I do think in times of uncertainty, customers and patients will find some solace and help us make a market in the medicines that we provide.
So let's talk about insulin a little bit. Obviously, as we're talking about generics and we're talking about the United States market, insulin is an area where having more supply available, it could be hugely important, because we are seeing these reports of outrageous prices, of care rationing, really troubling things around this kind of life-saving, irreplaceable medication. So first of all, just to set the stage a little bit, give me some of the kind of basic grounding on insulin and what it is that makes it so expensive and has kept the market from responding appropriately to the demand and keeping the price low.
Well, thank you. It's a great question. There's a lot of moving parts around delivery of diabetes healthcare, and insulin in particular. It's a very large market. There's a lot of patients on diabetic medications, including insulin. It's one of the largest volume products that we have in the United States, and the complexity of our healthcare chain and how those products are delivered creates some of the distortions you referenced. But let's start with the fact that Insulin's been around for a very, very long time, and one of the unique elements of insulin, it creates frustration that it's been around so long, and yet the perceived pricing is quite high. But insulin, unlike a lot of drugs, is fairly high dosing, and it's for a long period of time, and a lot of patients are on it. So if you think about an insulin, and these are now, by the way, we're moving away from traditional generics to what's called biosimilars, right? A different sort of product. It's not a regular generic. It's not an ANDA where the FDA establishes bioequivalence. It is more about establishing biosimilarity. These are kind of technical sort of orientations to it, but I just want to distinguish it. It's a bit different from a normal generic. But that product that is supplied to the United States and across the globe, if you think about the number of patients and amount of product they take, it's literally what we would call metric tons. There's a little bit of a different sort of nuance to healthcare, but it's metric tons of product, very large scale. Whereas many of the other biologics you hear about, many of the very important life-saving and life-enhancing biologics you'll often people hear speak to, which are actually quite a bit more expensive, by the way, on average, those products are kilograms of volume. So few patients or so small volume. The manufacturing side of the supply of that medicine is a wholly different world. You need massive, large infrastructure to supply insulin. You need high technology, you need expensive equipment, you need all sorts of specialized capabilities to make these other biologics, but you don't need metric tons. And that really changes the nature of the competitive environment because, for example, to make insulin drug substance, you need to spend literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for the manufacturing infrastructure to produce that product. And that is just not the level and scale that you would normally see in a biologic. And oh, by the way, when you make insulin, because of the nature of that product, that's all you can make in the plant. A lot of other plants can make multiple products in that plant and leverage the expense of that plant, which is also, by the way, much smaller. So that's a bit of a long-winded explanation for why there has been fewer people in the market over the years. The large branded companies that are at the hallmark of the vanguard of this medicine have invested hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's a pretty big barrier relative to coming in if you're going to be a third or a fourth supplier, right?
That's really useful context because so often people talk about it as if it's just that people are gouging the price to make more money, but really it is a expensive thing to manufacture and a very kind of specific project to be in the business.
Well, I want to divide a bit. That's absolutely true. And I'm talking first of all, that context was really focused on the competitive context, what brings in more people that drives down price further, right? The basic economic beauty of the capitalistic system, which we still operate inside the healthcare worlds, is more providers typically will drive down cost, right? Supply is fixed. As soon as supply goes up and demand is fixed, price will go down, right? That's a basic economic factor. And at the end of the day, there's been few new entrants because of this scale of the activity. Now, moving to the pricing side, and absolutely large investments are required, but some of those investments were made many, many, many decades ago by some of the current suppliers. And if you start thinking about the sort of marginal costs to the supply price in the market, that's not quite the same thing. I would suspect much of the original capital investment, if you've been making insulin for 30 or 40 years, my father's a diabetic and he passed away many years ago at a ripe old age. So insulin's been around for a long time. And the pricing dynamic here is a little bit more tied to how things go to market. And it's not I don't want to say a complex system, but it's a cumbersome system. And as you know, people have healthcare. A lot of folks have insurance. That insurance company may say you should buy from a very specific product. There's multiple types of, for example, insulin glargine, one of our big products that we're working on bringing to market. But typically your insurance company, if you go to the pharmacy, your doctor says, take insulin glargine, whether you get a product from brand company A or brand company B or generic biosimilar company C is left with what that health company's pharmacy benefit manager says. So there's all sorts of intermediaries between what the physician writes and what you receive as a patient. And that creates all these sort of pricing distortions. If you are a a person who doesn't have insurance, you may not benefit from some of the rebates that go on in the system, right? Between the PBM and the insurer and the employer, right? That your perceived price, and when you hear the president speak to it on State of the Union addresses, he's talking about sort of a list pricing you get exposed to. And it's a real problem in the industry that if you don't have insurance, you typically are exposed to much higher prices than if you have a copay through your insurance company. And a lot of the discussions here are about making the cost of insulin more closer to that net pricing that exists in the market. You should go on GoodRx if you are an insulin subscriber and make sure that you're not paying any more than you see on that sort of adjudicated, available to everybody, modern, connected software orientation, right? That's always a bit of a check. But what we're trying to do is, as we have had our investments with a partner, by the way, an overseas partner who has built a brand new plant, is looking for more transparency to make sure that our insulin, as we come to market, people understand what we're selling it for and can make an informed decision what they have to pay for. There's obviously a cost to go from a manufacturer to a distribution channel to a person who dispensed the product, and all the folks who support that all need to make some level of profit, right, to continue to provide those sort of medicines. But we hope that all of the sort of confusion that exists around in the market today between how products come to market is perhaps ameliorated as more biosimilar providers such as ourselves bring that product to market and work with a variety of entities, not just the PBMs and the insurers, but also direct purchasers. A lot of states are looking to provide insulin for their patients and working with them in the more transparent ways so that affordability is more transparent, more accessible. We're obviously looking to take our ability to supply patients in that marketplace, and we think everybody wins.
So I did read a report when I was preparing for this interview that Lannett was in conversations with the state of Michigan about opening up manufacturing facilities, possibly in the state. What are some of the things you guys are working on to address this problem and to try to open up this market a little bit?
Well, I need to be respectful of any conversations with any potential partner over time about what exactly their plans are. Michigan has been more careful about what they put out in the public market. Certainly, California has been more vocal about some of their plans. And again, these things take time and they continue to evolve. I do think if you recollect back to my original conversation that the drug substance, that API, the active pharmaceutical agreement, we call it the flour of the bread, right? That makes the drug work. That is tied to really, really large infrastructure. And the plants that typically you hear being talked about in the United States are typically more on the finishing side. They're taking that drug substance and putting it in a pen or putting it in a vial. And that doesn't necessarily change the dynamic of the supply, right? The supply is really about that drug substance, that very large, massive, hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure. And there's a lot of companies that are talking about helping, right? And they all can be a part of the solution. But we think at the end of the day, the economic engine, the economic supply side of insulin is that drug substance. And then there's a bunch of rules in the United States about the plant and the drug substance and the device and the finishing activities, how those are all tied together. But the point of what you hear the state saying is we would like to be a direct purchaser. That's a big change, right? They typically do not directly purchase as a state pharmaceuticals. There are experiments and trials out there. But if they become a direct purchaser, they can decide to publish what they paid for it, and then people can make decisions. But it's a complicated answer, and all those other folks in the supply chain, those pharmacies, those insurers, those PBMs, they do a great job of getting a lot of product out in the market. It is, broadly accessible. People do have a lot of access, but the cost can be prohibitive for some folks. We need to solve those issues, make that product more accessible. Many brand companies do have specialized programs to help. Many states are looking to have direct engagements to help. We want to be a part of that solution. I think there's, the market works pretty well, but it needs to work better. In particular for those folks, as you talked about earlier, who feel a need to ration or feel an inability to afford. That should be solvable because the medicine is, even at the end of the day, so many generics at least are not expensive in terms of the manufacturing cost and the delivery cost vis-a-vis what people pay every day for medicines, right? I mean, I think a little offline, but Amazon has recently announced a program where many drugs, generic drugs, not insulin, but many generic drugs are going to be made affordable. Now, again, they're not in everybody's community, right? A pharmacy, you need to talk sometimes to the pharmacist. You need that sort of healthcare support. There's a lot of services. It's very important to remind my major customers do a wonderful job of making product affordable and giving it accessible. But there are disruptions in the market. There are distortions in the market. And insulin, we think, is one of those spaces because so many people have it. They use so much of it. They eat it for their entire lives. And their accessibility and affordability needs to be improved upon. And you're hearing work in that space. We should not be brushing too broad of a brush amongst all the wonderful things our customers do, all the wonderful things our pharmacists do, all the wonderful thing that healthcare in the United States provides. I think it's one of the best systems in the world, bar none. But it has distortions, and we're trying to solve that on the insulin side.
So tell me about what Lannett is doing in this space in terms of your products, your generic insulin. How is it? Is there anything you're working on right now, and how is your product sort of different than the other insulins? How do you kind of keep that the price down relative to the brand products?
Well, first of all, again, this is not a generic. This is called a biosimilar, and it's a nuance, but it's an important nuance because it does affect how the approval processes in the FDA work, requirements, and how you compete in the market downstream. But we fundamentally have two very public development programs with our partner. The first is insulin glargine. That product, if you look at the branded companies, organizations, something like $2 billion of in-market sales. And not that dollars is how you intersect with patient need and healthcare, but it's a market of the size. It's a large market. And if you look at some of the third-party calculations of the value, which is more about the wholesale list price and other sorts of measures, there are companies out there that would say that the market on the list price is, for that product close to $9 billion. The difference between the 9 billion and the 2 billion is all the sort of complexities of our system that people are looking to try to resolve, what the manufacturer makes and what the channel needs and what gets lost in the process and the trade-offs between access and patient care. So we're developing insulin glargine. We've finished a clinical trial. We've indicated that we expect to be filing this product mid-year. A lot of support in industry or FDA to take a close look. We need to pass their standards, but we'll get a quick look. These products typically do well. The nature of a biologic, you're not mixing chemicals in a plant per se. You're recreating a cell line that produces insulin, which the bodies have done for eons, centuries at least. And so the probability of success, we believe, is higher than typical. It's a forward-looking statement, I have to say, but we are optimistic that by mid-year next year, we'll be bringing this insulin to market. And from there, let the good old American capitalistic market inside the healthcare ecosystem take place. We'll be an additional supplier. We'll be competing for business. We'll take an approach that's a little bit more visible and accessible and direct purchasing because we think that's a better place for us to compete. It's where there's more of a need in the market to provide insulins. And we're optimistic that we'll get an impact in terms of what we do as a corporate organization, while at the same time having that great effect on affordable access to insulin in the marketplace more generally.
Right, because you mentioned that these big companies, their marginal prices are not that high. So, in theory, one of the reasons their list prices are high is because they can be, right. There's not that many suppliers. So the idea is that putting more affordable insulin into the market could lead to everyone lowering their prices in order to sort of compete for the customers available, right?
I don't want to, make a commentary on their marginal pricing approaches or their costs of doing business. That's their market. But the fundamental economics of the American economy has always been supply and demand. And while there are lots of moving parts in that make it not a pure commoditized market for a whole bunch of good reasons, For sure, I believe more supply will make people more energetic about finding ways to reduce their costs, if that is their impediment, to help achieve their degrees of supply. And we're very careful about criticizing other people's market models. They have a variety of approaches to what they do, but it is a foundation of our economy. Is a foundation of our political and economic system. That if there's more supply coming into market, there's a chance to create more affordability. And that's certainly what we believe in. That's certainly what we're committed to. And we believe we're well structured to do that, given the fact that it'll be a new plant, it'll be an efficient plant, it's a dedicated plant, and it's using the latest of all the things that avail yourselves to the newest technology and help reduce costs. The plant does supply one other market in China, but that's actually good for the capacity to keep what we think to be affordable. It doesn't mean it's free. Right? It doesn't mean that it doesn't have a cost. These are technologies, there are syringes, and there are drug substance, and there's moving product around. But we think we can help make it more affordable.
So one more question before we wrap up. And I appreciate this may not be fully in your wheelhouse, so feel free to demur. But I know there's a lot of research happening in different areas around insulin that could kind of change the game. I mean, it's 100 years old. It hasn't changed a whole lot in that time, but people are looking at closed loop systems that could make there be less insulin required for a patient, longer lasting formulations, more shelf stable formulations. There's even kind of stem cell research into that could completely obsolete insulin. What are you looking at as you sort of look ahead to the farther future of this space? And what could these conversations look like in 10 or 20 years?
Well, it's a great question. And obviously, to start with, anything that improves healthcare, for people, even if it creates distortions that people provide in the healthcare that preceded it, is a great thing for the country and for patients. There is a ton of research around insulin. None of therapies today are what we call really disease modifying. They really just replace insulin. The body is no longer producing. So a lot of these other sorts of more advanced technologies are around trying to get the body to do what it should do naturally, that it has stopped doing for whatever reasons. Other of these activities are about making it perhaps less burdensome for the care. The daily injections that are typically associated with insulin, you can just spread those out or make it less needle-oriented, as the case may be. And there'll be work on that because it's a large market. There's a large patient need, and I think it'll be tremendous. Again, as a person who had a diabetic member in their family, that would be a good thing, and that's great. I don't think, however, that cavalry is going to be showing up in the near term, right? Some of these therapies you see, they've had fairly high utilization of other sort of anti-immunosuppressant agents in conjunction with that therapy. Those anti-immunosuppressant agents are quite expensive vis-a-vis the actual cost of insulin. Again, you got to remember that a lot of patients, not all patients, and that's the problem here, but a lot of patients can get their insulin for a copay, right? There's a lot of people who do, right? It's important to remember that the vast majority of the country who are diabetics do have access. The conversation about the few who do not are likely not to be solved by a very rare, very expensive new insulin therapy, either from a delivery perspective or from a disease modification. I think the solution to insulin for the folks who are most struggling with access is probably more competition on the so-called older forms of therapy, which are actually very effective. It's important to remember diabetics have a nice long lifespan if they stick to their therapies and pay attention to what their physicians direct them to do. And so I think the solution on the affordability is clearly on competition, legislation, political will on the delivery side for those portions of the population who can't get it. And then for the future of insulin, the modification, all the wonderful research that, again, is important, right? The innovation that the pharmaceutical industry, more on the brand side, has driven is laudable. And it is something that deserves an economic return. But near term, I think those therapies under most people's guidance are likely to have a significant impact near term on some of the aspirations that we are looking to do, and even more or less likely to have an effect on the near term affordability issues. A decade from now, who knows? And hopefully, absolutely so, but not today.
Going back to the CDMO side of the business, can you tell me a little bit about what your average or ideal partner looks like? Who are you working with in terms of size and profile and product specialization and things like that?
Well, our partnerships run the gamut of scale and size and orientation. Clearly, a lot of the larger organizations have their own capabilities, right? Have their own plant infrastructure. I think typically is some of the more mid-sized or more targeted firms that don't have all the infrastructure necessary to bring their great development work, to bring their good healthcare solutions to market. We have the full suite, right? It's not just about making something. It is about the technical transfer of what's made in the lab into a plant. There's a whole team built around that in our organization. We've had a huge experience as we've moved products from one plant to another or into our Seymour plant in doing that. We do it very quickly. I've worked for some very large organizations in my life, and I don't know of a firm who's been more adept, more quick about the speed at which we operate, right? So there is a size that we have, which is mid-sized to smaller, quite frankly, that I think gives a sort of speed and energy and entrepreneurism that allows a partner that's looking for a quick response and might need more than simply punching out tablets, as it were, in a plant. We can support them on the clinical side. We can support them on the development side. We can support them on the regulatory side. We can support them on the quality side, and we can certainly support them on the manufacturing side. And since our whole organization sees the importance of this leverage of our skills and capabilities, a differentiated leverage and skill vis-a-vis some of the broader oral generic markets in which we have competed, there is a priority around delivering those support. And I think, again, as I say, forget what I'm saying or what you might read on the website. Talk to one of our partners, and I think they'll be the strongest advocates, as long as we don't slow down their supply to coming on board with the services we offer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. It's been great to have you on the show and great to chat with you.
Thanks for having me as well. Have yourself a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
I'm now joined by Tom Lewis, Vice President of Supply Chain and CDMO Management at Lannett Company. We're going to talk a little bit about CDMOs and what Lannett does. We talked about this a little bit with Tim. We're going to get into it with Tom and really understand sort of why someone might choose to work with a contract development and manufacturing company and what some of the advantages are. And kind of some of the trends right now around CDMOs in 2023. So thanks for joining me, Tom.
Sure.
So give us kind of the background overview here of what is a CDMO and why now is a good time to sort of be working with one. What are some of the things you bring to the table in this current market and industry environment?
Sure. Just a little background. So Lannett Pharmaceutical in general has always, I think most organizations and people recognize Lannett as a leader in generic pharmaceutical manufacturing. But in the prior years, and Lannett's been around for over 70 years, and what a lot of individuals aren't aware, there is a component of Lannett's business where we are contract manufacturing for other entities, and that's the CDMO arena. This has been a fairly integral part of Lannett's business over the last 20 to 30 years, and it's an area that Lannett would like to concentrate on more. The primary purpose for Lannett concentrating on this now is we see a significant demand for contract manufacturing opportunities picking up in the United States with smaller molecule products versus some of the larger marketed products from the past.
That makes sense, right? Because this is such a huge area of such a great period of innovation in pharma. There's so much you can do preclinically with computers now that doesn't require a ton of overhead. So you can have a small pharma with a few people in an office or co-working space or something. But then when it gets time to get into the clinical stuff and to do the manufacturing, and you actually need to all of those facilities and resources to actually create a drug or a biologic, that's something that, you might not have the resources to build from scratch, or you might not be at a point where it makes sense to invest those resources, right?
That's right. I think a lot of the opportunities that we're seeing in new drug product applications aren't necessarily with the large branded companies any longer. They're with these smaller entities who have a small footprint established. They might have some scientists and obviously individuals from sales and the business aspect, but they don't have a manufacturing facility and they don't have a technical service department. And so they have this novel idea and essentially it's running through trials in multiple clinics, and they get to a stage where everything is going well, and that's where Lannett comes in. They approach companies such as Lannett and try to bring us on board with our expertise to help them get their product to the next stage, and that's commercialization.
The kicker is that pharma manufacturing is quite intricate and complex compared to, say, consumer device manufacturing, especially as we get into these novel therapies. I mean, I was at JP Morgan in January. There was a lot of conversation about how important manufacturing is around like cell and gene therapies, and how, much that it can affect the viability of your product. So how do you kind of assure that you're really delivering a quality manufacturing operation, that you're delivering transparency into it, so that people have kind of confidence that what you're creating is really kind of what they designed?
I think, first of all, from our perspective, one of the advantages we have is around the quality and the deliverability of our particular manufacturing site. Again, Lannett's manufacturing site has been delivering product to the market for over 70 years. We have a stellar quality background with no significant 483s. And we've been producing hundreds of different types of novel new products in the period of time that we've been in business. And so with that background and history that we have, I think it attracts opportunity. A lot of these entities who have these new drug applications, that's what they're looking for. And that's what we bring to the table.
So there's a lot of variability in obviously how drugs do, what the volume is, depending on the patient group size and what kind of revenues you can expect. So how do you negotiate with the companies you work with? Is it sort of a cost sharing, or is it like a flat rate? How do you negotiate that market?
So it's all custom. It depends on what the potential customer is looking for. In some cases, Lannett actually may own an ANDA for which a customer sees an opportunity to explore another indication for. And in those cases, it might be a cost-sharing arrangement. In most of the cases, though, in CDMO, the customer that's approaching companies like Lannett for CDMO services, that's their NDA, that's their application. And in those cases, it's cost plus for most situations, unless there's some other service that we can provide for them, regulatory service, or particularly our strengths are in distribution as well, maybe a 3PL services or outside of the normal manufacturing chain.
So one more question. What else haven't we talked about yet that you think is really important or interesting about Lannett or about CDMOs? What's sort of on your mind when you think about the trends in 2023?
Sure. I think when you're looking at trends in 2023 as it relates to contract manufacturing, I think the key strengths, what sets Lannett above some of our competitors in the CDMO world are, first of all, our size. We're not as large as some of the significant players in the CDMO realm, and therefore we're quicker to respond, where our attention to our customer is more hands-on, and our capabilities, although not unique, solid oral dose manufacturing, for example, or liquid manufacturing is not unique. There are a lot of sites in the U.S. who can manufacture those type of drug products. What does make us unique, though, is we have one location with all of those available platforms inside them, including distribution and 3PL and laboratories. They're all in one place versus some of our competitors. They're in multiple sites, which delays how quickly a customer can get their product to market.
So there's just efficiencies in how you're organized. And
I would say, to coin the phrase, it's been used many times, we're lean and mean. We have demonstrated our flexibility and how quick we can get products to market. And the customer base we currently have through CDMO has come back to us time and time again for more products. And we want to offer those services to new clients as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for joining us on the podcast and giving us a grounding in this. We'll also have an article coming out soon. This is an interview with Tom on this topic, so you can learn more. And we'll add a link to that whenever they're both up on the website. But really appreciate your time, and I hope folks will check out Lannett's website to learn a little more about what you do if they're interested.
Okay, thank you.
That concludes this episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about other installments in the series at pharmaphorum.com/podcast. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Acast, Stitcher, and Podme, where you can find and subscribe by searching for pharmaphorum. And don't forget to visit our website, where you can sign up for daily news and analysis bulletins, and to follow us on Twitter at pharmaphorum. Thanks for listening.